So you want to buy a Nikon film camera, but which one do you choose? There's so many choices. In this edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus, I'm going to give you 3 recommendations for manual focus Nikon film cameras that won't break the bank. Now, Nikon's been making film cameras for a long time. They introduced their first film camera back in 1959, and that was the classic Nikon F, which was the camera of choice for photojournalists in the 1960s into the 1970s. But I'm not going to recommend one of Nikon's professional cameras, either the F or the F2 or the F3. They're all excellent cameras, but I think it's better, especially if it's your first film camera, to get something a little simpler, also a little less expensive. So I'm going to recommend 3 more modern cameras, starting with 1977's Nikon FM. The FM was Nikon's first compact camera. Previously, they mostly made professional models, as I said, the F, F2 or F3, and there was also some Nikon models, but they were also big and heavy. The FM is smaller, it's lighter, it has an excellent built-in meter. It also takes modern batteries. A lot of the older cameras took mercury batteries, not just Nikon, but a lot of single lens reflex cameras, a lot of cameras in general took mercury batteries, which are no longer available. You can still use the cameras either without a battery, or you had to modify the camera to take a more modern battery, but that's no issue with any of the 3 cameras I'm going to recommend. Now the FM, one of the real nice things about the FM is it only requires a battery for the meter. Okay? The camera operates perfectly without a battery installed. It has shutter speeds from 1 to 1/1000th of a second. It's basically a simple camera with an excellent meter, an excellent viewfinder, easy to focus, and you are still able to use the whole range of Nikon AI and AIS lenses from 1977 on. The older lenses need to be modified to work properly on the Nikon FM. It takes a motor drive, an excellent motor drive, the MD12. I don't recommend it. The motor drive is going to add a lot of size and weight to the camera. I don't think you really need that. I think you're perfectly fine using the camera as it is. Like I said, it's very light, just a nice looking camera, has a self-timer. It works very well. The FM was introduced, as I said, in 1977, and you could pick these up for under $150 with a lens in many cases. Make sure wherever you buy, whether it's on eBay, that there is some type of return policy. In case you receive the camera and it doesn't work properly, you could send it back. Some of the online retailers have a 90 or even 180-day warranty. Okay, so the next camera I'm going to recommend is 1982's Nikon FG. Now, this is not an FG I'm holding here. I don't have an FG. This is an EM, and the EM came out in 1979. The EM and the FG are the same size. The FG is just a more modern version. It's an improved version of the EM. It has automatic exposure control, program exposure control. When you set the camera for program, it picks both the shutter speed and the aperture. You could also use it as an aperture priority camera, which means you pick the aperture, the camera picks the shutter speed, or fully manual and use the built-in light meter to set your exposure. It also takes a motor drive similar to the MD12. I believe it's the MD14. It also takes an auto winder, which just mounts to the bottom of the camera. It's the same auto winder that is used on the EM. Again, I don't recommend it. This camera is much more compact than the FE. It's also lighter, great for travel, nice little compact camera. Now the FG you could pick up for under $100. The FG, however, requires a battery, the same battery as in the FM, but it does require a battery for operation, not just for the meter, but for the electronic shutter. You do have one manual shutter speed, and that is a 90th of a second. So these batteries last a long time. They're inexpensive, about $4 or $5 for a battery for one of these cameras, and they do last a long time. Now, in 1983, Nikon came out with a camera, looks very similar to the FM. It's the FE2. There was previously an FE, which came out in '79, but the FE2 is an updated version of that camera. It does have an electronic shutter, does require a battery for operation, not just for the meter, but for the electronic shutter. Anytime you hear a camera has an electronic shutter, it means it needs a battery to operate the shutter. This camera has a 2/50th of a second manual speed if your batteries are dead. It has aperture priority automation, whereas with the FM, there is a built-in meter. You operate either your shutter speed dial or your aperture to set the exposure. With this camera, like with the FG with aperture priority, you set the aperture on the lens, the camera will choose the shutter speed. You could also use it for metered manual, where you select the shutter speed and the aperture. Nice thing with this camera, it offers a top shutter speed of a 4,000th of a second, where the FG and the FM offer a top speed of 1/1000th of a second. That's not going to come into play often unless you shoot sports or action or in very bright conditions. With a high-speed film, you may need that fast shutter speed. So I wouldn't base my decision on the top shutter speed of the camera, but it also has shutter speeds down to 8 seconds, whereas the other cameras go down to 1 second. And of course, if you're going to use shutter speeds that long, you need to have the camera on a proper support, a tripod preferably, and use a cable release to fire the shutter. One of the big advantages to buying Nikon is the extensive collection of lenses that are available. These three cameras that I'm recommended all require what's called AI or AIS lenses. Those are lenses manufactured from 1977 on. And these cameras all take the F mount, which was the original mount from 1959, but they made some modifications in '77, and these cameras require those lenses. You cannot mount a pre-AI lens on these cameras. You will damage the coupling for the meter, okay? But you can use pre-AI lenses if they were modified, and what we call that is they were AI'd. They were modified to work on these cameras. Okay, so this camera is a little more expensive. You're going to pay $200. Probably could get it for a little under $200, sometimes with a lens, but just shop around. There are a lot of these cameras available. They were very popular, and they're fairly easy to find. Now, there were other models of these cameras. For example, the FM, there was an FM2, there was an FM2N, there was an FM3A, which came out, I believe, in 1981. That camera today sells for $700 or $800, which is a little more than what it sold for when it was brand new. And it is fully manual, operates without a battery, Also, it's electronic. It has auto exposure control, and for that it requires a battery. So it's a pretty unique camera, has an excellent shutter, and that's why it's so expensive. But again, I think it's overkill. I think the FM or the FE2 would be adequate. As far as the FE2, as I said, there was an FE previously, and of course this FE2, but then there was the Nikon FA, and that camera was introduced, let me just check my notes here, the FA was introduced in 1983, and that camera had a special metering system. It also had program exposure where the camera picks both the shutter speed and the aperture. Those are also expensive. It was the first camera from Nikon to have what's known as matrix metering, segmented metering, which is very popular today. Most cameras, digital cameras, have some form of that metering system. It kind of looks at the entire scene and averages it all out. It's using computers. These cameras, these three cameras, have what's known as a center weighted meter, which is perfectly fine. The newer meter, the matrix meter, may give you better exposures in certain situations, but there's nothing wrong with the center weighted meter in each of these cameras. Now, previously, I did full videos on the FE2 and the FM, and I will put a link in the description below to those videos. So watch those videos and it will explain how every feature and control on these cameras work. It even shows you how to load them. There's also one on the EM, and I'll put a link to that, but I do not have one on the FG. I'm familiar with the FG, but I never own one, and I don't presently have one to do a video on. I do intend to do that in the future, but in some ways it's similar to the EM, so that will help you a little bit. But there are plenty of videos online explaining how all these cameras work. So I hope this helps you. Film has made a resurgence, and film cameras have gotten more expensive. You were able to pick these up much cheaper, 5, 6 years ago, before this resurgence of film. It's kind of like CDs and albums. Albums were just about dead, record albums, and CDs were real popular. And then there was a resurgence of records. And now go into a store and look at the price of records. They're much higher than they were previously. So basically the same thing has happened with film. And I think it's going to remain. In fact, there's some talk of some companies making new film cameras. So, time will tell what happens with that. Film is expensive, the processing is expensive, but it's a lot of fun to shoot film. I mean, I did for most of my life, shot film cameras. So if you have any questions on any of these cameras or some others, and any comments on this video, please leave your question and comments in the comments below. I always try to respond to all questions and comments. I don't always do it. Sometimes I'll miss them, but I apologize for that, but I always try. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I publish a new video every Monday morning and Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon.